Running Aces Casino and Racetrack is the Twin Cities' premier choice for exciting entertainment, 24/7 gaming and dining, monthly comedy shows, and $1 blackjack with no commission or ante, making it the most player-friendly casino around. Trout Air Tavern at Running Aces offers Minnesota-inspired handcrafted dishes with locally sourced ingredients and the trout that made the area famous. Running Aces Casino and Racetrack, 25 minutes north of downtown. Visit runaces.com. Running Aces, your night out is waiting. TCL is a proud sponsor of the 1500 ESPN studios. TCL, America's fastest growing TV brand.
For those who simply can't get enough talk about the Vikings, we present Bonus Chatter. Bonus chatter about your favorite team that's unscripted, unfiltered, and uninterrupted. This is another edition of 1500 ESPN's Purple Podcast.
Hello, welcome to another episode of the Purple Podcast. Matthew Coller here with you, and Judd Zulgad joining me as well. What a busy and wild cutdown day for the Minnesota Vikings, Judd.
Yeah, it was, and some surprises. Some big, we talked on the Friday show, Collar, about the fact that what would be the surprise cut. And I think we both basically agreed that there probably wouldn't be a shocker. But there were two moves made today that we certainly hadn't talked about of late. Now, you had projected one going way back on the Purple Podcast, but there were two that I didn't see coming, including Mike Zimmer, perhaps his favorite player of all time, deciding to retire and become an assistant coach immediately.
Yes, Terence Newman calling it quits. Now, I did mention something to you that I saw Terence Newman with the earpiece in during the game the other night, and I don't remember ever seeing a player having the coach's earpiece in during actual play. But I noticed that on the broadcast the other night, and it did run through my mind. Either he's preparing to be a coach next year, or he's going to be a coach with pads on. And, I guess we got to the point where they might have said to him, look, we really want to keep Holton Hill, who did make the roster and had been on the bubble the whole time, but I think solidified in the final preseason game that they wanted to keep him because he has a high ceiling and he would probably get picked up by someone else. So they may have said, look, we really want to keep this guy. We don't want to cut you because we want to have you as a member of our coaching staff. And it would seem that Terence Newman could agree on that. And he has been such a gigantic asset. I hope if people go to our website, they can read the story that I did about it. But I basically just went around and asked everybody the type of impact that he has had on them, and it has been incredible, from Xavier Rhodes to Mackenzie Alexander to Eric Hendricks to Delvin Cook, even, who they put his locker next to. I mean, you have seen the ripple effect of Terence Newman and how he connects with players and teaches them the game at his old age. So having him on the coaching staff is huge. And then Brian Robison did take me a little by surprise, Judd, because I had seen him in camp and thought, okay, he looks like he's still got it a little bit and he could probably fill in 15-20% of the snaps, but they decided that it was just better to have some of their young pass rushers instead of B-Rob.
Yeah, and keep in mind too, going back to the springtime when the Vikings basically came to him and said, take a pay cut or you're cut immediately. He took a $2.1 million pay cut down to $1.1 million for this year, and they still released him. Now, I will say this. As far as the Vikings and their decisions go, good for them. Because in this town with this team, we have certainly seen it before where there is an aging, declining player who this team will keep.
Yep.
And football to me is the one sport you can't do that. You can't. There's not enough roster spots to reward a guy because you like him a lot.
Right.
So, and this is one place where I think Zim has grown, because I think Zim's very, very loyal, and at heart I think he's a decent guy, but I think he's really grown in the fact that when it's a guy's time, he decides it, and that is a tough thing to do. I mean, we've talked about this a lot before, but I go back, Greenway stuck around, and they allowed him to stick around, and you know what? It didn't work. And I think a lesson was learned by Zimmer and the coaching staff, Matthew, from that one, which is we might love you, we might want to keep you, but if we're going to be as successful as possible, these 53 roster spots are precious. And so we can't just keep you because. And so I think we saw at least one, if not two examples of that today, where if you turn the clock back 5 years and there were a couple of aging players, I think there's a good chance they stay here. And in this case, the Vikings said we are on the precipice of being in a Super Bowl, and we have huge expectations, and we just won 13 games, and unfortunately, we can't afford to keep players who are in what they consider to be decline.
Yep, so now let's take a look at the defensive line with all that said, because I agree with everything that you said there, that Mike Zimmer probably did learn his lesson of keeping Chad Greenway a little too long and not replacing that spot. And then when Eric Hendricks and Anthony Barr got dinged up in 2016, they really didn't have anyone to back them up. And so now in this case, behind Everson Griffin and Danielle Hunter are two rising players for the Vikings. Stephen Weatherly has been nothing short of fantastic. I mean, he registered, according to Pro Football Focus, 14 QB pressures, which means a hurry, a hit, or a sack in only 77 snaps. So one every 6-something snaps in preseason, he was getting after the passer in some sort of way, which is a ridiculous rate. And I know it's preseason, but with Everson Griffin on the shelf for preseason, he was playing against a lot of first-teamers, and he did a fantastic job. So he looks like a guy that's taking that next step. To Sean Bauer, they have loved him from the moment he got here. He was our Mr. Mankato last year. So that's now the defensive end group, I think. And all of this is barring changes, because after we record this, they could trade for somebody, and of course we'll jump back on. But as you listen to it, there are still things that are in flux that could possibly change. But at the defensive tackle position, of course, Linval and Sheldon Richardson, but they decide to keep David Perry, who is the nose tackle. And, that really tells me, Judd, that they just didn't see Jaleel Johnson as a pure nose tackle and thought, you know what, if Linval goes down, we better have somebody else, because there was no one else really behind him to play that nose tackle position.
Yeah, and so yeah, I think the change that we've seen now too is if they're going to err on the side of keeping a aging, declining veteran or what they might consider to be a project, especially on defense, it's going to be a project, because these guys have shown before that they are very good at taking guys who we might be skeptical about and turning them into players. So to your point about moves, I think we're definitely going to see one or two more moves on Sunday, because there's always a process where we get the roster at 350 on Saturday, right? And we're like, this is the 53-man roster, and then on Sunday there's changes. Where do you think the changes, the possible subtractions will come? Because I find it very interesting that this team kept 5 players at the running back spot, and I find it very plausible that by the end of the day, Sunday, that might be down to 4.
Yeah, there's 5, and there's also 5 safeties, which surprised me a little bit. I thought as soon as George Iloka was in the mix that we would see Jaron Kearse get cut. Now, he is a valuable special teamer to them, but if there's somebody who's right on that edge, it's probably him. I would also say Marcus Sherrills and Mackenzie Alexander, too, because both of them were mentioned in an Albert Breer article about potential trades as guys who he has heard on the block. So the defensive backfield could still be in for changes. The offensive line is probably not set, or maybe I shouldn't go as strong as probably, but there is a possibility that there is some type of other move coming. They got Brett Jones in a trade, and they could go ahead and decide to get somebody else. Pat Elflein is not going on the PUP, but he's definitely not going to be playing in week 1. So That's sort of interesting. And Rashad Hill had a pretty bumpy preseason where he was sick to start and then didn't play well at first. And, I think that they do like him a lot, but I also think that if some other right tackle became available, you could see it happening where they would bring that person in, or especially somebody to start at left guard if they're not thrilled with Brett Jones and how he might fill in. So that's still a possibility to me. But the defensive backfield, Judd, really interesting that Sherrills makes it once again, as always.
He always makes it. Never question that. Never ever question Marcus Sherrills. I questioned it for 3 years. I just gave up and said, you know what? He's always, because he does something really well that's really tough to do, returns punts.
Yep. And
that's a hard job.
And Holton Hill, it seems like they made the room with the Terence Newman decision to have Holton Hill there. And he's a guy, Judd, that I think from the very beginning they really, really liked, and he got off to a little bit of a tough start, but they see him as being a high ceiling type guy.
Yeah, and I think that with a guy like that too, once again, it's a developmental type guy, but Zimmer, especially when it comes to defensive backs, is marvelous at developing those players. So I guess you say to yourself, do you want to keep Newman, who you like a lot, and you know what you're going to get, but he's aging, and release Holton Hill, and then he goes signs with, take your pick, the Chargers or something, and develops there. And so I think the Vikings' philosophy is we've got a head coach and a coaching staff that is really good at taking what we perceive to be pretty good project players and having success with them. Offensive line-wise now, let's go back on that. Because the elf line thing, I think it needs to be cleared up. There's almost a confusion. With elf line, when a guy is on the pup to start training camp, he can be taken off at any time.
Yeah.
And now it's being made a big deal or it's being reported that he was taken off the pup. Well, unless the Vikings were convinced that he was going to miss the first 6 weeks of the season, you take him off the pup. But you're right. He's not going to play in week 1, and I wouldn't be surprised if he doesn't play in week 2 or week 3.
Yeah.
Take me through as far now, and they could make a trade here, but as far as where things go right now, Coller, take me through what you perceive to be the starting offensive line on September 9th against San Francisco at U.S. Bank Stadium, and what you perceive will be the starting offensive line by, let's say, week 5 or 6.
Okay, this is still a little bit up in the air for me, but I'll give you a couple options here. We know that the tackles are going to be Riley Reiff and Rashad Hill, so we're all set there. But in the middle, I could see Brett Jones starting right off at left guard and not center, and Danny Isidora starting at center, and then Mike Remmers at right guard. I think that that's a possibility. And if it's not, then it'll be the other way around probably. Or Tom Compton could potentially start at left guard. He played most of the first team reps during preseason, but he also really struggled. So I would guess that what they did in the 4th preseason game by having Danny Isidora play center and Brett Jones left guard, I would guess that's how they do it, or vice versa, and having Isidora at left guard, but I really don't know. It's very much up in the air between those 3 guards who is going to get the start, and maybe we'll get some hints at that this week, or maybe that'll be one of the things that they decide to not really reveal, but
they won't.
Yeah,
no, they won't.
That's going to be tough. That's going to be tough to figure out.
If Isidora plays center in week 1, how much of a gamble is that, though? Because, I mean, I know he played there in week 4. I know Cousins didn't play, but I know that Cousins also has not taken a snap in a game from Brett Jones as well. But Jones at least has that experience. It would seem to me to be really tempting fate and getting a little bit too cute to start a guy who was a guard and has been a guard at center for the first time in a National Football League game in week 1.
Yeah, no, I agree with that.
I don't like that idea.
That would be the argument for having Brett Jones be the starter, but the argument against that is that Danny Isidora has been here the entire training camp, mini camp, all that, and center is a more complicated position. So if they feel like the blocking is going to be about the same, you're going to probably take the guy, assuming that, and I haven't talked much with Danny, since he's been here, but assuming that he's a fairly bright kid and is able to pick up on calling out the blocking schemes and things like that, he would be more adept at understanding those things than Brett Jones would. So maybe it would just be a little bit easier to handle for him being center, that maybe the only difference for him would just be snapping the ball.
Right.
Rather than, where Brett Jones would have to get an understanding of all those different things. So, that will be a tough decision for them. Remmers looks like he's going to start at right guard, but I am still leaving the door open eventually at some point this season, if things don't go well with Rashad Hill, for Mike Remmers to kick back out to tackle. But Judd, let me move on to a couple other interesting things. Wide receiver position, they keep obviously Diggs, Thielen, and Treadwell, but they move on from Kendall Wright, keep Brandon Zylstra and Stacey Coley. This is one that I waffled on a little bit toward the end, but even in mini camp, the signs were there that Kendall Wright really just did not fit on this team.
Well, and I think you brought this up a bunch of times as well as training camp unfolded, which is he didn't play special teams.
Yeah.
Like if you're gonna be that far down the depth chart, and you can't play on special teams, it's a 53-man roster, and it's 45 plus now on game day. So yeah, I just think every year, Matthew, every single year, I swear to God, since I started covering this team full time in 2005, but it seems like every year since about 2007, there is always a guy that they bring in or sign, and you're like, oh my goodness, a potential difference. Javon Walker's going to come here, and Javon Walker's going to catch a bunch of fire passes, or
Dayton Jones last year,
or a cornerback named Chris Carr. Chris Carr's going to come in here, and he's going to challenge for a job, and inevitably this happens. They don't play a snap in the regular season. They don't get in the media guide as a Viking alum, and so when you predicted weeks ago now, or a month plus ago, that Kendall Wright was going to be the odd man out, I said, that seems like a perfect fit for the guy who signed, and we all said, there's a slot guy that you're going to use. And then you say to yourself, well, hold on a second. They've got a guy who plays the slot really well. Kendall Wright doesn't play special teams. No, there's the next Viking who's never going to play down in the regular season.
Yeah. And the thing with the slot receivers is that Stephon Diggs and Adam Thielen move around so much that there's no need for a pure slot receiver. And also, really, look around the NFL. There aren't too many of those guys left that are only the number 3 slot receiver. But
correct.
I do think this says something, because Brandon Zylstra and Stacy Coley do not have any catches between them. The team letting go Chad Beebe, but I wouldn't be surprised if he's a practice squad guy. It really does say that what's going on with Laquan Treadwell in this training camp has meant something to them. That does not mean there's a guarantee from me that it's going to be better this year, because I don't know if it will be. But at very least, you can say that the progress that we've been reporting on from Treadwell in camp has also been seen by the team, and I think also Kirk Cousins has liked him so far, and that might have made a difference with moving on from Kendall Wright, that they feel like they don't need the insurance policy. Plus, they see Stacy Coley as somebody who could, I think, get into the game this year and even have some potential.
I would like to speak to Zylstra right now personally and say this. Young man, congratulations, and enjoy your one day on the 53, because you strike me as the exact type of guy who might be a casualty on Sunday.
Oh, yeah?
He strikes me as I think this team, if you were to ask me right now, where is this team going to look to immediately either upgrade through the waiver wire and or a potential Sunday trade as teams get logjammed? I think wide receiver and offensive line for sure. I think we're going to see moves made at offensive line before the weekend is done. And we're going to see a guy who probably made the team, i.e. a Zylstra type of guy, who very well could lose his job.
Yeah, I agree with that. He was not super impressive in either of the games. I mean, he made a nice catch when it came to the fourth preseason game in the fourth quarter, but I mean, that's pretty much the bottom of the barrel as far as preseason performances go. He did really stand out, though, Judd, in the training camp in the early part. In those most important first couple of weeks, he was one of their better receivers and was getting a number of first-team reps there. So I wouldn't completely count it out. I mean, you need some of these guys that are making barely any money that might be able to get you a handful of catches if they have to. But when you're talking about proven depth, if they're interested at all in going out and getting somebody that is a proven depth player, that is a possibility, and you have to leave everything open to, hey, maybe they're going to make a change on the offensive line. At running back, Judd, they decided to keep Mike Boone and Rock Thomas, and you mentioned that it's possible that one of those two, probably Rock Thomas is behind Mike Boone, could also be this guy. But if they don't make a change there, I really like what both of those guys brought to the table. I mean, Mike Boone is an athletic freak, and he was shredding tackles all over the place. Rock Thomas has good hands, is a natural runner, has good vision, and both of them deserve to make the team. There might be a change here, but I would look at this as Latavius Murray is going to be here for one more year, and then you can move on and have it be Mike Boone and Rock Thomas beyond Dalvin Cook.
Now, Boone and Thomas, and probably Rock especially, they fit what I've seen Rick Spielman do 1,000 times. and I think I want to say I talked to Rick about this years ago, and he's not wrong here. It's actually not dumb. But anyway, Rick Spielman's theory is you go through your cuts on Saturday. If you borderline really like a guy, you keep him on Saturday. And then you wait until Sunday when teams are trying to assemble their practice squads, right? Because the market right now is going to be flooded. And then tomorrow teams are going to be trying to sign practice squad guys. And for the most part, what most teams do is they look inward, right? So they're like, okay, we liked this guy in training camp. We don't want team X, Y, or Z to take him, so we're going to try and sign him quickly. Rick's theory is that those teams then become so preoccupied and busy in trying to assemble their own roster and then their practice squad that they don't pay attention to the secondary portion of the waiver wire, which is the guys cut on Sunday. So a guy like Rock Thomas, if Spielman's theory from back then holds true still, a guy like Rock Thomas would be the ideal guy because they like him enough to keep him today, don't expose him today, and then make the cut tomorrow when teams are preoccupied and try and sneak him through to their own practice squad at that point.
Now, let me tell you why I think it's a good idea, aside from just the Latavius Murray part in the future, to keep 5 running backs is Judd is 2018, and it's more of playmakers than certain positions. And I see both of these guys, Boone and Thomas, as potential playmakers. That when they were going against good competition in camp and in preseason, they showed that both of them could play. And you might look at these guys as depth for injury, but also, hey, maybe we could put in Rock Thomas in this one certain package or whatever like that, and that might make sense to keep him because of it, as opposed to having him go down to the practice squad. So, I kind of look around. I look around too, and I see a lack of depth at tight end. There's only, David Morgan's not really a playmaker, though he'll get in the game quite a bit. But there's a lack of depth at wide receiver. So if you're trying to find people to put the ball in their hands, I want to keep those 5 running backs. And even, I think it's interesting, the amount of love for David Morgan and C.J. Ham cannot be understated when it comes to inside the Vikings room. C.J. Ham is another guy that is kind of like, he's a fullback, but he can also catch the ball out of the backfield.
Right.
He's the exact type of fullback you're looking for. Now, the quarterbacks, of course, Kirk Cousins didn't get cut. Judd, you're shocked.
Oh, I would have cut him personally. But
totally stunned.
Trevor Siemian was the guy in my mind, but whatever.
Kyle Sloter makes the team, though, as we were pretty sure, but he had a really good 4th preseason game, so he makes it quite clear that he is on the team. I believe still, though, that Trevor Siemian is the backup. If they were going to move on from Trevor Siemian, or if he wasn't number 2, they would have cut him and just taken the roster spot and given Kyle Sloter the backup job. So he continues to develop, but a very, very nice preseason overall for him. I just want to run down a couple of the cuts that were sort of interesting, guys who might either be on the practice squad or were kind of on the cusp. Jeff Badditt is an interesting guy because he runs a 4.2 or 4.3 40, so he could end up on the practice squad. Same with Chad Beebe. Blake Bell was a foregone conclusion, I thought, to get cut as soon as they drafted Tyler Conklin in the 5th round. Cornelius Edison was a guy that I got a lot of tweets about, Judd, that people thought that he could even potentially start and have Elflein play guard. And Edison, he was never meant to be in the game with the first team.
Why do people think that? I get those tweets too. I'm not being critical. I'm honestly asking. I don't understand. I mean, we watched him play, and I would call him a well-meaning player. Like he wasn't an idiot.
Yeah.
He tried to do his job, but you watched him play, and you said to yourself, this guy doesn't function that well in a preseason game. I don't understand why we kept getting tweets about you don't understand how well he's playing. And I'm not Mr. Film Breakdown like you are, but my God, I never extrapolated that this guy was going to be a candidate to be the starting center when Elflein didn't start.
Yeah, he's very much a break glass in case of emergency type of guy who is on the practice squad and somebody gets hurt, and he's the first guy that comes up because he's played center before. But as soon as they got Brett Jones, that was a big upgrade over Cornelius Edison. The thing with Edison is he can't really move in run blocking, and that's kind of a problem. Now, Colby Gossett getting cut, that's a classic practice squad type of guy. He was really good at Appalachian State, especially in zone blocking schemes, but it just never showed up in training camp. And maybe he's somebody that they view as some sort of project Tavares King is another example, like you've mentioned, Judd, of a guy that, oh, look at this veteran. Maybe he'll be a part. No, nope. Now the one that was interesting to talk about a little bit was Afadi Odenigbo, because he had that really good game against Jacksonville when they moved him out to defensive end. But I would say with Odenigbo, he's kind of a tweener. I mean, he's not quite a defensive end, and he's not quite an interior defensive lineman. And,
sure.
I mean, to some people that might sound like positional flexibility, but if you're not particularly good at either one, then they're going to keep other guys. And there was so much talent on this defensive line. I think it was hard to keep him, even though he's a decent player. That was going to happen. I mean, I think it tells you just how good Terence Newman, or not Terence, sorry, I was just reading the name Terence Newman. It tells you how good Stephen Weatherly and Tashawn Bauer were in training camp, that they let go B-Rob, and that, Odenigbo just really didn't have a chance.
Do you get the feeling, Coller, like I do, and this is not to blow smoke, but when it comes to defensive decisions, I have an ultimate confidence now that this staff is not going to screw up.
Yeah. Yep.
Like it's not like there are times you look at cuts and you're like, that's a borderline cut. I don't know if that's a good idea. I don't know if you shouldn't have swapped player A for player B. But this team, these guys are so good at developing defensive players, and Zimmer is so good at understanding exactly what he wants schematically. There's not many times I can think of that I've looked at a defensive cut and said, I don't know about that. Now, offensively, that might not be true. But defensively, there's a level of confidence that I have here that's pretty extraordinary, because usually you can find one cut per offense or defense that you can question. I don't know the defense I can find that.
Well, and you look around, too, on this defense, and there are some first-round picks. There are quite a few. Xavier Rhodes, Harrison Smith, Anthony Barr, Trey Wayans. But there's also guys who are not first-round picks and were kind of interesting decisions at one point or another by Mike Zimmer. I mean, look at even Everson Griffin. He was not a starter and was kind of looked at as, he's a situational guy, and, we're not really sure how we feel about him. And Zimmer comes in and they give him a contract extension and say, yes, we really want you. We want you to be a big part of our defense. And that has turned out incredibly well. He's one of the best defensive ends in the NFL. And I think decisions like that, Danielle Hunter, 3rd-round pick, and a couple of years later, he's getting this gigantic contract to stay with the Vikings long term, that they seem to hit on these guys. Even Andrew Sendejo, where I think even Zimmer at first wasn't sure what he had there. Sendejo has been a solid starter across from Harrison Smith for the entire time he's been here. So, when it comes to the decisions they make, and then you even add on to this, Judd, bringing in George Iloka, I mean, it's such a small thing. And I feel like it's one of those, you guys are really in the thick of the weeds here when you're overpraising the George Iloka signing. But Rick Spielman was on the broadcast the other night talking about Iloka, talking about how he can come up and play linebacker if they need, or he gives them all this defensive flexibility. And that's another part of the B-Rob decision, is that if George Iloka can do something like that, that means Anthony Barr can go play edge rusher in a 3rd down and 10, and they can move up a safety into a linebacker position, and I think that makes them a better defense.
If you don't enjoy being in the football weeds, I would prefer that you get off my planet. I don't want you on my planet, because the football weeds are what it's all about.
Well, this is if you don't like the football weeds, this is not the podcast for you. But
I'm just saying, the 3 safety thing to me, the potential for 3 safeties. I honestly, if you want my down and dirty opinion of the Newman decision, it also stems from the Iloka signing, because I think we're about to see different types of nickel packages than what we previously have seen or expected. And this is to say that I think you're spot on. I think Mike Hughes was a good pick and is going to play a big role here. But I also think that we are going to see 3 safeties deployed, which Zimmer has done once in a great while previously with his team, but it hasn't been the ordinary. I think we're about to see Iloka, Harrison Smith, and Sendejo on the field at the same time quite a bit.
Yep, I agree. And let me just give you a couple names that have been floated around out there that I posted on our own website that came from Albert Breer yesterday. 2 of them that really caught my eye, which was number 1, Chance Warmack of the Philadelphia Eagles, a really interesting name. of a guy who was once pretty solid and was a 10th overall pick, I believe, of the San Diego Chargers. His name has been out there. I like that idea for the potential of the Vikings to go out and get another guy who's a proven offensive lineman. A just-in-case type of move might be fine. And, the other guy is Austin Howard, who's a tackle from the Indianapolis Colts. His name was out there as well. And this speaks to your point that there could be more moves. Howard played right tackle for the Baltimore Ravens last year. Not great, but solid. And with Rashad Hill, I'm just not sure. I mean, asking him to play 16 games is going to be a lot. And when he went up against the Eagles and Saints at starting right tackle, it was a bloodbath last year in the playoffs. And guess who you got to play this year? The Eagles and Saints again. And so when he went up against the best of the best, it was a little bit problematic. So, I look at someone like Warmack or Howard as guys who could be pretty interesting for the Vikings.
And Rashad Hill, I think, is a very nice security blanket backup player. And
yes,
if he has
totally.
And if he has to step in, I think he can. And I think he can step in and actually play pretty well. But that does not mean that he is prepared to start on a regular basis at this position. So I'm with you. If you could find a way to get Rashad Hill back into a backup role and increase your depth where you clearly need help with your depth, I think that would be a great move.
So it will be very interesting to see.
I got a question for you.
Yes.
I got a question
What's
for you.
that?
I got a kicker question before we go. Dan Bailey was let go by the Cowboys.
Don't do
have
this,
any
Judd.
interest?
Don't do this, Judd.
Do you have it? I'm asking you right now.
Do this.
Do you, if we are sitting in let's pretend we are sitting in the TCO Performance Center of Performance, as you call it, and Spielman and Zim and the staff are on their third glass of wine. Do you call Dan Bailey's agent?
I don't know. I mean, I would be pro kicker who's done something before. And
yeah, me too.
Even with Kai Forbath, I got some debate over how good Kai Forbath actually was over the last 2 years, but the guy made 90% of his field goals, which I think is pretty solid. Dan Bailey is coming off a year that wasn't great, but what's crazy about kickers is, we've seen other kickers like Phil Dawson and Adam Vinatieri where somebody thinks, this is it for them. They're definitely done. And Bailey isn't that old, but they're definitely done. And then the guy just keeps on kicking till he's like 400 years old. So I look at Bailey as a guy who has been very, very good. I just pulled this up over his career, 27 for 40 beyond 50 yards, which is really impressive. And in between 40 and 49, he's 52 for 59. So this guy has been a really good kicker. If there's any trepidation from the Vikings when it comes to Daniel Carlson, you might as well. Even as much as Bailey struggled at times last year, he only made 15 of his 20 kicks. But the 2 years before that, he missed 5 in 2016 out of 32 and only 2 out of 32 in 2015. This guy has got a pretty darn good career. So
I'm just giving you some thought. Yeah. I'm just giving you pause for thought.
I don't think that they would do that, but I would say it is possible if there is any issues that he does end up Daniel Carlson does get changed out if there are any problems. He could miss 2 field goals in week 1, and that could be it for him, I think. And that's the type of pressure he's going to face, especially with a head coach that clearly does not love kickers. So it was great.
No, he does not.
The other night on the broadcast, glad the kicker made it. Didn't even say his name.
I'm just throwing it out there that there's a high-profile veteran kicker available who would not cause the head coach heartburn. So.
Yep.
Just put that out there.
Yep, you're right. Okay, so that's what we got for now. But by tomorrow, things could change. Also, we will have an episode dedicated to the acquisition of Khalil Mack by the Chicago Bears and how that changes things for the Vikings as well. And then it is game planning time, and we have a lot for you Purple Podcast listeners as we lead up to week 1. Going to check in with our offensive defensive line guy, Brandon Thorne. Going to get together with our pro football focus guy, Eric Eager. So lots to look forward to, and we will talk to you all then on the Purple Podcast.
This is Stephanie March, food editor of Minneapolis St. Paul Magazine, and fellow foodies, it's the most wonderful time of the year, the Minnesota State Fair. And not only are foods on a stick, I'm bringing you a podcast, On a Stick. It's a show released daily during the run of the fair, covering the fair's best of the best, the must-eats, the new foods, the old favorites, plus events, hidden gems, and the shows you can't miss. We're going to cover it all. Just listen to Podcasts on a Stick. Find episodes on the Podcast One app or wherever you find your podcasts.
Aretha Franklin's funeral. I'm Tim McGuire with an AP News Minute. Aretha Franklin is remembered as the Queen of Soul at her funeral in Detroit. Gladys Knight, one of the many taking part today.
Walk on through the wind.
The Reverend Jesse Jackson says she was one for the ages.
Aretha was our queen. She belonged and belongs to us. She was blessed to have the powerful gift of singing, perhaps the most remarkable voice, unique the world has ever heard.
In Washington, people paying their respects, saying goodbye to John McCain as the Vietnam hero, longtime senator, lies in state at the U.S. Capitol. McCain's funeral is tomorrow at Washington National Cathedral. Actress Vanessa Marquez, who appeared on the TV medical drama ER and starred in the film Stand and Deliver, was fatally shot yesterday by police officers in South Pasadena, California, after she reportedly pointed a BB gun that looked like a handgun at them. I'm Tim McGuire.